I've met some of you before, but not all of you before. It's nice to see you. My name is Rob Sheffield. Um, I'm one of maybe 7 or 8 people who helped to get this Bristol Innovators Group launched and going and keeping going. So it's really been around since November 2019, and we have about 1,070 members now. Anyone make any sense of that?
Big blob.
It's definitely at least one big blob, Kath.
Can
Um,
see some bits of faces, maybe.
okay, yeah,
Some-
and
Yeah, I
it's
was
a
thinking a
bit
bit of
like
that.
it's a bit of a kind of projection thing, isn't it? Right? You know, we might see all kinds of stuff in it. Here's the next slide,
Oh,
and now try and unsee it.
Mm.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because we are very quick pattern formers, I think. You know, we're really good at that, aren't we? Our brains are very able to spot patterns fast. Maybe it's a bit tricky for us to stop seeing patterns, right, when they're not there. Here's another one that you may have seen before as well, sort of a square of 9 dots. And here's the task. The task is, so you might need to draw this out in front of you, or if you can, just imagine it in your mind. Join the dots with 4 straight lines, keeping your pen on the paper. So you can't just lift it off and do 3 straight lines through. And when you're done, every dot must have a line touching it. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to do it, right? You might want to draw it out in front of you.
Struggling with getting it to 4 lines.
It's really
More than
tricky.
4 lines is fine.
Yeah. I saw somebody once on a course get a big paintbrush out and paint through it in 1 line, just with a huge
Right.
wide
Yeah.
paintbrush. So here's another way. And I think it is one of those exercises from which the proverbial think outside the box comes from.
Mm.
Because a lot of us form a box, don't we? And I deliberately said square, right, with a bit of brief setup. So another type of pattern. How can downhill jumpers practice new sorts of jumps while minimizing the risks to themselves? And this is what they did. They sort of built a huge bouncy castle. So people could take off. You can sort of see it to the right and land, and it just wouldn't matter really if they made mistakes, right? They kind of built in a safety buffer. James, maybe some links to what you'll cover, but I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to you so you can do what you want.
Yeah, lovely to see you all. Some familiar faces, some new faces. I think anyone who knows particularly about anything that I talk about, this is a subject matter that's pretty central and close to my heart. I'm just going to start my screen share. Hopefully you can all now see that. Some thumbs up, very good. Yeah, so arguably I was going to start off and say, well, what I'm showing you today is an experiment in its own right. This is actually the first time I've put a set of slides specifically around like the experimentation mindset, which, as I say, has been something that's been incredibly close to my heart for numerous years now. But typically, the way that we talk about this is more in a context to supporting startups and scale ups in their work that they're doing. And we talk a lot about helping founders from their journey from idea to product market fit. So yeah, typically that experimentation mindset comes more in that sense of saying, what is it we believe to be true about our idea, our business, whatever it might be, and what we're therefore trying to help them with is to adopt this more experimentation mindset to go out and get evidence that is really helping them out. I have, however, been exploring this kind of experimentation mindset in more my personal life, and seeing kind of, yeah, it's kind of that classic scenario where if you're looking to buy a new car and you suddenly find a car that you quite like, suddenly you can't see anything but that car, or somewhat back to Rob's example of the horseman in that random image. It's that kind of thing, and I think that's what I found really interesting. Is as soon as you start adopting this experimentation mindset, you start seeing more and more ways of adopting ultimately in your day-to-day life. So just to start it all off, I guess fundamentally everything kind of starts like with an idea or a goal. Maybe there's a problem that you found, or ultimately you've just got a desire to change something in your business or in your life. So yeah, whether you're a founder of a new startup, maybe a business looking to create a new product or innovation, SME that's maybe trying to improve some processes, maybe building some efficiencies, whether you're wanting to learn a new skill or maybe change your career or ultimately, yeah, just learn something new. Or maybe you're just like a health conscious parent looking to improve their well-being, which like that's another area for my personal side of things of how I've been adopting this experimentation mindset. But the big challenge with all of these things, yeah, we've got these big ideas, these big goals, or this place that ultimately we would like to be. But challenges very, very quickly start coming in and where we start facing some blockers. So these blockers typically kind of fall into these kind of categories in terms of what I've come across. The classic sense of the fear of failure. So how might you look to your peers, or maybe there's pressure or the feeling of maybe pressure that's coming from others. So if it's a business scenario, you have to create something, or you need to do something, and it has to work, or it must deliver a certain return. So you start getting those fears that start coming up. Maybe that's failure particularly in the UK, it's kind of seen as something that's really bad, which, yeah, if you go to the US, failure is almost celebrated, which I think is a brilliant thing. And certainly is something that I've particularly tried to focus on, in that sense of reframing fear. Yeah, can get my words out. Reframing fear is actually, it's an opportunity for learning. And basically, you can never fail. It's more a case of, can you take that moment to reflect and take it as a learning opportunity and enable yourself to move forward, rather than it being something that feels very, very negative. But also, I guess the other side of things is not necessarily fear of failure. Some people also fear success. So what happens if everything goes amazingly well and everything, yeah, absolutely works? Then the other kind of classic side of things is that the fear of the unknown. So what is that potential outcome? What might actually happen? What happens if the thing that you're looking at doing might be wrong? That sense of, yeah, until you start these things, you just have no idea. And then literally to that similar point, people also get into this scenario where maybe the idea is so big and they just don't know where to start. So you haven't got enough knowledge, you maybe get kind of in this scenario where you get a little bit trapped. You just end up researching loads of things, just in this massive hunt for knowledge. And ultimately, you're just procrastinating from actually starting anything. And I think particularly in the startup culture, there's this kind of phrase about a wantrepreneur. So someone who will, yeah, constantly just be hunting around for all of the right things to do, and they just won't actually take any action. And then, yeah, you get into the scenario, you don't necessarily know where to start. You potentially start setting really unrealistic expectations. So that, again, kind of slightly coming back to this sense of pressure. And then if you do get to a place where you do actually start taking some action and you start going down this route, then you get into this scenario of this kind of sunk cost fallacy. So this is the point of, you started doing something and you then feel like you're so committed and you have to see this thing through. That kind of sense of, well, I've maybe put so much time, money, effort, or whatever those things may be, that you can't stop now. This thing's in motion and you feel you have to continue doing it. Or you get into the scenario thinking, well, actually, I just need to do this, 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 and then it will all be okay. But then those goalposts just continually move. So I guess kind of, I was going to take a little moment and kind of step back from it. But so who am I, and like, why am I talking about this? So the first thing here is obviously kind of reframing that sense of failing. I've certainly done that a lot in my career, from all sorts of different shapes and forms. I've got an experience in development, design, marketing, product, and strategy. So very kind of like holistic viewpoint, very kind of like digitally focused. During my career, I've created 4 businesses, varying levels of successes and failures. And ultimately, kind of on that whole career journey, in the different ways that I've worked, I've taken many ideas from like really early vision. through to a place of launch and getting customers, and whether those are my own ideas, working directly with like startup founders, but also within the settings of existing startups, scale-ups, and up to corporate level. And I mentioned I've kind of got a lot of kind of first-hand experience in seeing ideas and ultimately kind of businesses fail. But that's from the level of like startups failing, but also up to corporate level. So I spent some time back in the day when everyone had a Nokia device. So I was at Nokia for just under 5 years. And then this little company called Apple rocked up and launched this thing called an iPhone. And Apple, Nokia thought it was all going to be okay. And so I had pretty much a front row seat for about 4 years, just watching shit hit proverbial fan, should we say. Which has certainly kind of laid a lot of foundations and some of the stuff that kind of sits behind all of the work that we now do at Lunos. So across all of that journey, I ultimately just become fascinated with like why startups, why businesses or ideas, or even in a personal setting, why your habits fail, why you can't get to that promised land that you're trying to get to. And therefore just had this desire to find a better process to like systematically test ideas. Always had this love and passion around sort of customer centricity, and well, fundamentally like businesses like don't exist if you haven't got customers. And therefore also kind of based on my experiences, just looking at business like a lot more holistically. So I've gone down many rabbit holes, looking at all sorts of frameworks and tools, approaches, etc. And over those years, just kind of honed and adapted my own kind of, I suppose, toolkit and approach, which is now sort of culminated in all of the work that we now do at Lunos, which was founded in 2020 in the lovely delights of the pandemic. And yeah, as I kind of mentioned earlier, everything that we do is helping founders and scale-ups to solve all of these issues and kind of identify and run experiments to give them confidence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that the experimentation mindset, and fundamentally it kind of sits down into these kind of different areas. So it all starts with having a growth mindset. So that kind of sense of willingness to learn, willingness to try things, learning from failures, as I mentioned earlier, that like really important to reframe failure into these learning opportunities more than anything else. It's a lot about kind of having this kind of bias for action. So learning through doing. So rather than sitting on a nice ivory tower, coming up with the best strategy and believing that, yeah, now we just need to hit go and everything will be a-okay. It's that sense of, well, what's that smallest thing that we could start today, now, to like in the next 5 minutes, whatever, that helps you get that learning, that insight, that data from your customers or from actually just doing the thing. And as a result of that, it helps you to overcome that analysis paralysis that certainly I have experienced many a time. And ultimately, yeah, slightly related to that, this has been a bit of a journey for personal development from my side, because I got sort of perfectionism tendencies and that analysis paralysis. So it's again, it's a really interesting journey. Then the other side of things is that sense of taking your big visions, your big ideas, and really trying to break those down into these little bite-sized activities that you can go out and do. To these small little component parts, and identifying maybe like the key bets or the things that you believe to be true, and working out, yeah, what are the biggest, riskiest things that are gonna, yeah, maybe be a big blocker to this thing happening, and therefore helping you get to a place where you can actually take that action and start. And then the last part was just having this mindset of always be testing. This isn't just something that you do at the start of a big idea or a big project or that new skill or thing that you want to learn. As I mentioned before, it's that sense of when you see that new car that you want to get, you can't see anything but that. So it's that sense of kind of training that muscle, I suppose. And so it's an ongoing process that's relevant at all stages of ideas or a business. So I'm gonna be like, why should we experiment? Some big scary numbers on screen. I was also trying to find some stuff that was slightly outside of the business realm. So yeah, kind of seeing that over sort of 90% of people don't achieve their goals. I'd imagine we can all picture some scenarios of the classic New Year's resolutions. A few weeks later, are we still doing them? Do we really commit to them? And then, yeah, I suppose from a business perspective, startup percentages in terms of failure rates seem to vary a lot depending on actually where you're looking. But yeah, as a loose kind of middle ground, I picked sort of 85%, but you can see stats of over 90 that fail, etc. But fundamentally, it's a huge, big, scary stat. And then from very kind of digital product perspective, there was some research that was done a few years ago, basically saying that over 80% of features in products and services are rarely or never used. So fundamentally, we spend a lot of time building stuff that just doesn't work, or customers don't want it, or whatever it might be, or if it's in your personal life, you don't commit to it, and maybe the way that you're trying to measure it isn't quite right. So there's that kind of big sense of saying, or stop taking these massive leaps and try and work out a different way and a different approach. And then I guess the other side of it of why to experiment, it's helping you to de-risk these big decisions. So building evidence and getting confidence by taking this action, getting insight through doing, and getting knowledge through your market and those kind of things. Really trying to reduce your time to learning, and also kind of reducing any resource that you're putting on the line, so the time, money, and effort. Also, by taking this or adopting this kind of experiment mindset, it helps you to course correct quickly. So if it does look like this idea is going to fail, or your project's not really panning out quite right, enables you therefore to find that better route. And if it's a startup, then you can pivot and move to where your customers are seeking their problems to be solved, or whatever it might be. Then the other side of things, probably kind of alluded to this a little bit, but absolutely think big with all these things, but you should start small. So there was a graph that will come up on screen in a bit that really kind of visualizes this. But it's all about kind of testing those riskiest and lowest evidence items first, and then kind of continually iterating. And then the other kind of key piece, which I always try and remind founders about, instead of getting into that sense of the sunk cost fallacy, is to time box any activity that you're doing. So you start running your experiment, you don't just kind of carry on doing that activity because you're approaching it like an experiment. You're setting up specific time periods and allowing and building in these kind of review stages, so you can have this moment to reflect on exactly how it's going, work out whether you want to continue or not, and ultimately, you can therefore course correct if you need to, or you actually for sure can continue if it's giving you the right data points. And then also to that last point, it's going to help address that whole kind of sunk cost fallacy, and hopefully trying to solve that. What I wanted to do is to slightly throw it over to you guys a little bit, before kind of jumping into the more practical side of things and saying, right, how do we actually do this, and what does that kind of framework look like in terms of what we put together? And I'd love to, if anyone's got any ideas they're working on, I appreciate they might be a little bit precious, you don't want to necessarily disclose too much, but if anyone's got a project or an idea, maybe something in their personal life, if you want to chuck it into the mix, because I think it would be really interesting. And I guess for me, that's my biggest thing I'd love you guys to be able to take away, is that sense of saying, well, based on what I'm seeing today, or just that thing I'm thinking about starting, here's actually now something I can take away and do something with. So I don't know if anyone's got anything they'd be up for sharing. Don't jump at once.
Looks like Ted does, James, I think.
Yes, sorry, I'm struggling a bit with my Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm involved in an initiative that came from my. This is not a business startup. This is about creating a forum or a network around dealing with sharing information across various stakeholders in the world of open spaces in Bristol, or the wider, maybe wider. So the concern comes that we've got relatively well endowed physically with open spaces. They're under a lot of pressure for development, and there's very little resources to steward or look after them, including our parks, which is a major thing that people notice. The budgets available for parks are diminishing, whereas the support for open spaces comes from a variety of different places. There might be wild types of stakeholders. There might be wild people interested in wildlife, or biodiversity, or play, or sport, or cultural events, and there's very little interchange of understanding between those different stakeholders, or even any shared sense of the value of open spaces to those people, which makes it very difficult to get a platform in which we can, as a city, improve the access to and the quality of open spaces in the future when it's a city under huge pressure. So following on from an event in September, I'm hoping to see whether we can get those people together, and at the nursery stages of that, got a small team together, but it feels quite scary.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Ted. So are you trying to kind of connect people that are looking for these open spaces? And
yeah, they all have very important roles to play,
right.
but they play their roles in quite often diametrically different directions, even though they probably all share, if there was Venn diagram kind of thing, they'll probably overlap hugely, and value those bits where they do overlap.
Right.
That comes from conversation and being in meetings with different people and kind of following with their agendas.
Brilliant. Okay. Nice. So anyone else got a project or idea or something that's going through your mind that they fancy bring to the table?
I do, James,
No?
if there's
Yeah,
nothing
sure.
from anyone else.
Absolutely.
Just it's very early stages, but you know, our work is around kind of leadership and creativity and innovation, you know, and mindset skills, but really kind of workplace learning around those areas. And increasingly, clients seem to want a blended solution. In-person delivery, access to some kind of online digital learning component. Although they sort of say they do, although to be truthful, I don't see them rushing to require it. Anyway, it has been on my mind for a while. And the short of it is, I chatted yesterday with a colleague of mine, a Belgian colleague. We've done a lot of work together. And we are going to, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to think of a couple of areas that we could pilot something online on a platform. We're probably looking at something called Learn Worlds. There are lots of platforms around, but we're going to pilot something. So we've kind of gone away to think of a couple of, you know, content areas, target audiences, prices, the whole lot really, and we will agree on something, and then we'll develop it. I think ready to launch in September. So that's the plan. We're just at a very, very early stage of exploring it.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that, Rob. I guess as a slightly to try and abstract and kind of look at the both scenarios for you guys, I think there's an element of trying to work out the problem fundamentally that you're trying to solve, and just spending a little bit of time with that, and then based on who it is that you're trying to solve that for, having some conversation to work out, I suppose, arguably probably this may be more for you, Rob, but that sense of And I think you talk to it, like how important is it for those people to actually solve it, and to kind of listening to what you're saying there, if you're considering now getting to a place of going off and finding a platform, building loads of content, etc., but then we don't necessarily know customers are actively wanting it and maybe willing to pay and all these kind of other little scenarios. That said, so how can you bridge that and try and take some smaller, more arguably timely and quicker to learning action to really understand and map that piece out? And maybe even to a point that you could start just creating some content, whether it's behind paywalls, whatever it might be, that could, for sake of argument, just be on, say, YouTube, rather than going off and creating all these platforms and all that kind of stuff. That platform piece is a much bigger effort to get to that place. So it's kind of work out, well, what could the journey be to that place? And I guess, Ted, to your point, or your side of things, I was trying to think if, and that's the reason I asked the question, if you're trying to connect people that are looking for these open spaces versus the people that have access to, or whatever it might be, whether there's a simple way that you could just try and manage the facilitation of the people wanting versus the kind of supply demand side of the things, and just trying to experiment a little bit from that perspective. But I thought I'd just chuck that in. I think also, hopefully, if you kind of keep that in your mind as as we go through this more practical side of things in terms of the framework. And then, as I say, just try and think about your scenario, and to everyone else, if there's any ideas or projects kind of going through your mind, then keep that going through as we go through. Cool. So this is the visual I mentioned on a previous slide. So at a very early stage of an idea, typically, so if you look at the kind of the red kind of triangle over on the left-hand side. So at a very early stage, there's a lot of uncertainty and therefore a lot of risk that is going to be forming around your project, your idea, the thing you want to change in your life, whatever those elements may be. And then as a result, you should be focusing more on things that are low fidelity, things that require low resource, low effort, low cost, etc. And then as you go through and you're collecting the insight, you're learning through doing, you're talking with customers, whatever those scenarios may be, and therefore back to the kind of the bottom of this graph, the confidence and the validation that you're therefore getting, as that starts to increase, the uncertainty and the risks can start to come down, and therefore slightly justifies increasing the fidelity of the idea or the resource that you're putting towards it. So to Rob's point, at the very early stage, it's kind of maybe having some very early conversations, and then as you go through, it kind of justifies therefore creating some of this content or the materials through to the later point where you have this kind of all singing or dancing platform. So if you kind of keep that in your mind and try and think, well, what would, if the ideal end goal is up in that top right-hand corner, what is that? And then try and work your way back a little bit into these kind of baby steps. So this is the framework that sits at the core of everything that we do at Lunos, conveniently called the idea framework. But basically breaks down to these 4 steps. So the first step is about identifying. So slightly back to the timeline that I shared. So it's prioritizing and fundamentally working out what are the bets that we are placing. What is it we believe to be true? What is the idea? Working out all the elements that sit within it. And then, as I mentioned, kind of prioritizing those to work out, well, where is best for us to actually start and take some action. The second stage is then saying, right, how can we define and therefore set and scope out what the experiment's going to be? So we're creating a hypothesis that sits around it, and therefore off the back of that and based on what it is that we believe, they're selecting an experiment that makes sense to help us take that action. Step 3 is then actually going out and running that experiment with customers or running it in your personal life if it's something that's more about you. Running it specifically for that time box, this is the key piece, running it for that time period. And then you can get through to step 4, where you're reviewing the findings and ultimately working out whether this passes. So you kind of maybe justifies continuing on that track. You may want to iterate, make a few changes and have another go. Maybe you need to pivot based on some learnings that you've got, and actually now we need to go over here rather than where we were originally thinking. Or actually the results is just looking like this just really isn't going to fly. So let's just stop. But as I say, this is then just a continuous cycle that you're going through, hence the arrows on this. So once you've gone through to that analyze stage, you're then picking up the next item in the list, so to speak, in terms of the prioritization that you came up with, or maybe reviewing whether anything needs to change based on what you've just learned. And therefore, yeah, you're continuously going around this. Actually, what I will just say as I'm going through this, if anyone has any questions on any of these slides, feel free to raise your hand, drop something in the chat. Rob could probably shout at me because I can't actually see the chat side of things at this point. So yeah, to kind of break each of these steps down in a little bit more detail. So step 1, identifying your bets. So in a more kind of like startup scenario, which as I say is kind of the core of where this framework's been honed, but in that kind of scenario, it's saying, right, in terms of across the business, so your market, looking at who is the customer, what's the problem that we're solving, what do we think the solution is, what's the business model, and what do we think our routes to markets are, how are we going to go out and find our customers. Or if it's just a project that you're exploring, like what is it you currently believe to be true, and just really kind of mapping those things out. Is having that that kind of frame of reference, I suppose, and asking yourself those kind of questions. And then, like to the visual that's on screen, you're kind of mapping it out on this 2x2 of how risky are each of these bets that we're placing. So if that turned out not to be true, how much of a risk to the overall idea, the project, the startup, your personal vision, whatever those things may be. And then how much evidence have you got that backs up that thing that you believe to be true is actually true, based on your own data through your own action that you've taken, rather than some Google searches, or if you've been jumping on ChatGPT rabbit holes, some AI hallucination, or if this is completely a hunch. All of which are entirely okay, but this is purely just a mapping exercise to somewhat try and get a lot of this stuff out of your head, which is usually a challenge in its own right. A very simplified version of this is to basically take out the risk scale. So you can just look at this and just say, right, what is it we believe to be true? And then how much evidence or how much confidence have we got behind each of those things? That could be a kind of a quicker way of doing this. So basically what you're trying to do is focus on the areas where you have little to no evidence, and in the scenario where you're including the risk, the items that have more risk, so stuff that's up more in the top right-hand corner. So then you're taking one of those and you go off into the define stage. So this is where we're focusing on things that are increasing our speed to learning. It's doing things that are small and resourceful. If you kind of visualize that that chart that we had on screen earlier, and also doing things that don't scale. This is, I think, a classic rabbit hole that a lot of tech founders specifically fall into, is that they have this big vision for some fancy new product and they immediately want to jump to code and building stuff. Building stuff in tech arguably is getting a lot easier, and Brian, you could probably certainly speak to an element of this as well, but doesn't necessarily mean you're building the right thing. And typically then when you're building things in code, that is fundamental, that's going to help you scale something that is already working. So let's try and get to a place where we've found the right thing that's going to work before we're just chucking loads of tech stuff at it. So in terms of speed for learning, your primary goal is to kind of really learn from the market. And back to my point I was just saying, is like, it's not about building the big shiny vision that you've got. It's really trying to look at like trying to say, well, what action can I take today, or in a very, very short time scale, if you really had to. So there's a scenario I like playing with founders of like a hypothetical customer, I've kind of called it, of basically saying, so if you had a customer that came to you like right now and said, I've got this massive hair on fire problem. Somebody's told me you're working on something in this space. Could you help me solve it? Is your answer going to be, yes, I can help you, but we're building our tech platform at the moment. I can check on the wait list and you can be the first to know? Or are you basically going to say, yeah, I can come and help you out and we'll just make it happen? And that's the kind of the mindset to try and think about. It's like, well, if you were going to answer, yes, we're just going to make it happen, well, what would you do? And focus more on, so we talk a lot about kind of just focusing on delivering value to customers, and fundamentally the harsh reality of, particularly in the tech side of things, customers don't want new products and features, they just want their problems solved. So if you kind of really focus from that point of view and be very customer centric, etc., that's really solid place to focus. And then slightly back to the tech piece. As I kind of mentioned, the tech is there to help you scale validated learning that you've got. And then in terms of that word scale, it's trying to think like at a very early stage of an idea, scale is actually really kind of getting your first customer. And then once you've got your first customer, it's saying, right, how do we get 10 customers? When you've got 10, how do you get 100? How do you get 1,000? Whatever it might be. So think about scale, not immediately to, oh, I want to build a unicorn, so therefore I need my big shiny tech platform. It's saying, well, actually, I need a customer. So I know how to find and serve and deliver value to a customer. And that will typically not need anything that really scales. If you're honest, like there's an element of this of being small and doing stuff resourcefully is like, this is the slightly the unsexy side of all of this stuff, which I think a lot of founders like to hide behind and want to build the sexy stuff. So the other side of the define piece that we mentioned is about creating your hypothesis. So this is saying, right, so essentially kind of finishing the sentence here. So I believe that whatever it is, so this is the bet that you're testing. To test it, I will, and then this is giving details about the experiment you're going to run. So what the activity is that you're actually going to do in the experiment, how long you're going to run it, that's the really key bit, so the time boxing side of things. And then in a kind of a more business setting, I suppose, like who's involved? Is it people internally, the resource that is needed? Maybe some customers, if it's slightly more external facing, maybe there's partners involved, etc. And you may also want to start talking about budgets and those kind of things as well, just to map that out. And then the really important end pieces as well, it's saying, well, what are you going to measure? So when you're running this activity, what are you going to be looking for, and what you're going to keep an eye on to when you get to that place of looking at the results is going to be your key signals of, this is heading on the right path or not. And then slightly then extended to that point, I am right if. So what is that measure of success that is going to give you enough confidence to carry on doing this thing? Or if it's way out of whack, then you can look at it and say, right, now we need to make some changes, or actually we just need to stop because these numbers just don't add up. But the key thing on that last piece about the success measure, the framing that we often talk about with founders is that sense of saying, right, at this point, there's going to be another big assumption, and it's more the case of just picking a number that would feel okay. It's never going to be scientific enough saying, right, I want 100% success, 100% success rate. It's picking a number, because the key point here is when you get through to the analysis stage, it's giving you a point of reference. Because if you don't have that point of reference, you'll get into the sunk cost fallacy scenario where you've committed a bunch of resource, you've got some data, it looks okay because you've got nothing to refer back to, so you can carry on with it. So even if that number at this point when you're creating this hypothesis is like, oh, I really don't know, it's just pick something, because then when you can review it, if it feels like, right, I said 20% and it's come out at 15, okay, I'm all right with it. That's in a reasonable range that I can accept, and therefore I can move on with. Whereas if you just looked at the results and it was 15, then I don't know, it's a lot harder to kind of refer back to. So then, coming on to actually running the experiment. 4 key pieces here is about monitoring things. So you may be in a very nice scenario where you can actually achieve the result, or you may need to course correct a lot faster than you originally thought. So you may have time boxed it for say 2 weeks, but then 2 days in, suddenly you learn something from the very first customer that actually you should really stop right now, or you rapidly need to make an adjustment, which then comes on to the second point, is about being agile. So keeping slightly back to the monitor thing, like because you are monitoring, you're able to go in and course correct and fix things and do things that don't scale to fix those challenges, to ultimately focus on delivering that value to your end customer. And then back to the listening side of things, this is noting any kind of like learnings that you may be getting as you're going along. So these might be feedback from customers, might be internal insights that you're getting, or arguably you might be getting new ideas as a result of doing the do and delivering this value, or whatever it might be. There might be additional things that come to mind, that then when you come back to look at all your bets and your assumptions that you've been making, there may be new things that you want to add in. And then the really key bit, I think I've mentioned this a fair few times now, but the stuff around time boxing, that's the really critical piece. Making sure that you're building in those review stages right from the off. So then when you come to the point of reviewing the results, again, slightly back to the hypothesis scenario, it's a bit of a kind of filling in the blanks on the first 2 bits. So what is it that you saw? So the insight that you observed. What is it you've learned? So what's this helped you learn and identify? What's the conclusion of this experiment? This is, I suppose, the key bit if you don't do anything else. It's like working out, is this a pass, so you're happy to continue, and this is maybe something you are going to actually genuinely implement. So something you need to make some adjustments on. If you need to pivot, so complete sort of maybe change based on something you've been seeing, or if you're going to stop. And then, in terms of next steps, if there are any, obviously if you're going to stop, then maybe not. Any kind of key next steps. And then the key piece here is that once you've reviewed those results, back to, if I just bring it back up on screen, oops, there it is. Not that one. Oh, sorry, screen's jumping around. The key piece after reviewing those results is you're coming back to that identified point. So you're coming back to essentially look at all of these bets that you've been making and work out, right, where are you going next? So you're continuing that cycle. So as a bit of a summary, these are the kind of the 5 key bits. So identifying your bets, picking the risky assumption, which kind of sits as part of number 1. Define your experiment. So what is that bet? What's the activity you're going to run? How long are you going to run it for? What are you measuring, and how are you going to measure success? Take the action. That's the key thing. If you don't take anything else from any of this session, it's that sense of actually just take some action. Find something that's small and a lot lower scale than probably where your mind originally goes. And fundamentally, that things become clearer as you learn, as you take this action, and then learn and iterate, and just keep on that cycle. Thank you so much.
Good stuff, James. Thank you. James, there's a question from Nick in the chat. Nick, I can read it. Nick, I can read it out, but you feel free to just ask it yourself. You might put a bit of emphasis here and there if you want.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, James. That was awesome. So I'm just starting a project at the moment where it's basically validating. So a guy's come to me and he's seen an opportunity in the market, and he's asked me to kind of do some early research to see whether it's worth kind of going in further into investing in it.
Nice.
So written some hypothesis, written a script to do some interviews and that kind of stuff. But I was just wondering, with your framework, when it's that kind of like the test is the customer interviews, so with that really super early stage, there's no product yet. Do you kind of use any metrics, or sort of how do you define sort of what success looks like for that? I wonder if you've got any kind of tips.
Yeah. So there's it's kind of known as like the XYZ hypothesis that you could also use, as that sense of X% of type of person will do outcome. So from your survey or an interview perspective, it's that sense of saying, right, we believe that 20% of these people that are interviewing will all say certain things, or all have certain views around a problem or a challenge or whatever it might be. Obviously that would be slightly more specific based on your exact scenario that you're going into. But yeah, that would be the key thing. It's just kind of picking that percentage that feels, again, kind of back to my point, is picking a number rather than just doing the do and then looking at the results being like, yeah, this kind of feels okay. Because also in even having that conversation, particularly if there's multiple people involved in a team, like someone might think, well, if 20% of people say this, then we're okay, versus someone else might be like, well, actually, for me, it needs to be up for 40%. And it helps to create a bit of an alignment piece as well. But yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Pleasure.
We've got a few minutes all. Any questions for James from anyone else? Any reflections? Anything you're wondering? Do stick your hand up, or just jump in and go for it, or put something in chat. I can see Nick's got his hand up. Go for it, Nick.
Just following on for this then, James, I'm not sure you used the language of sort of, did you talk about product market fit in your talk? But I'm just wondering, like, how much work do you do to define that with the founder when you're starting kind of building out your hypothesis? And maybe we kind of think on that project I was talking about, I've kind of talked to the founder about certain levels to product market fit as well.
Yeah.
If you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So product market fit is something we talk a lot about now. Yeah, particularly this year, we've done a whole bunch of conversations around actually what is product market fit. And I think you were slightly alluding to it there, but there's a lot of elements that might mean you're on the road to product market fit. But I think personally, I've always stayed a little bit away from the topic of it, because I think it's so misunderstood. So I'm more back to like people talking about minimal viable products. Everyone's got their own little version of actually what they think that means. And so as a result, I kind of stayed away from it. But yeah, we've very much kind of formed our thoughts around it now. And yeah, it's absolutely, it's more of a scale of it, and you'll have indicators along the way. So very early stuff, maybe even literally to what you were talking about, going out and having conversations with a certain number of people, and a bunch of them are signing up to wait lists, or they're kind of putting their names down saying, oh yeah, I definitely want to have some more conversations, or actually you should go off and speak to XYZ people, and therefore they're putting their kind of little black book somewhat on the line, their reputation's on the line. Very, very weak signals, absolutely. This is definitely not a sense to say, yeah, we got product market fit, but it's an indication that there might be something here, which therefore kind of like back to the whole piece, and the whole piece around experimentation mindset helps you to feel okay with committing more resource. So if you think back to that chart that we showed earlier, and then from there, as you kind of build up your wait list, or you start running some early pilots, or you get letters of intent, or people pre-ordering, and blah 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 blah. These are all then much better indicators of still just being on the path to product market fit. You still haven't got it. But then when the genuine kind of product market fit piece comes in, that's when there's a lot of like kind of talk about this feeling of product market fit, which is therefore quite a hard thing to kind of really measure. But a lot of the talk is that sense of there's a big switch from supply and demand. So the demand will really outstrip the supply, and you're basically on this kind of hair on fire moment, trying to just keep up with all the demand. You've got customers essentially kind of just signing up left, right, and center. You don't know where they're coming from. It's hard to track, blah, blah, blah. And money is just rolling in, which obviously, yeah, very first world problems and nice to have, right? But that's more the sense of, yeah, when it's more genuine product market fit. And then even once you've got to that place, this is also part of the narrative that we talk about, is there's this kind of sense of it's a continuous product market fit. So just because you may be fortunate enough to get to that place doesn't mean you're always going to stay there. Back to my first-hand case study of Nokia. In theory, they had product market fit for years, and then yeah, suddenly a little upstart comes along and completely takes their market. Or the likes of a pandemic happens, and your product market fit suddenly just disappears overnight because of extra outside impacts that come about. But also, when you get to that place, you're typically going to be in a scenario where you're considering, well, what's our next move? So you may start looking at, well, we need to expand our customer base, or we want to build new products or features, and we want to launch in our different territory. All of those scenarios, you're almost slightly back to not entirely square one, but pretty much back to that sense of, well, we haven't got product market fit in this new area that we're looking to explore. So you need to then go back through the same kind of cycles. Hopefully you'll get to product market fit in that area a lot quicker because of all the previous learnings that you've got. But it's just, yeah, again, it's a bit of a mindset thing about looking at the sense of it's a more point of continuous product market fit rather than this is just a destination. Once you've got there, everything's golden.